Hi, what's up, guys? Hey, there was a interesting post that I found on one of the tabletop or related sports forums on Facebook where somebody was talking about how much they appreciate and like having the ability to sort of control the flow of what happens in certain games, to be able to roll the dice yourself and be able to produce the outcome yourself. And I was thinking about that a little bit lately, and I thought that might be an interesting thing sort of as a topic of discussion here. So as you probably already know, there are in general two different types of games that we see. We see open engine games in which it is clearly visible to the player exactly how results are derived. And then we see largely computer games that are closed engine, in which something happens sort of behind the scenes and you don't know exactly what happens or what the math is behind it. I, for one, prefer to play with open engine games as much as possible. And the reason why is in part because I can control the action. I can control what happens. I can go on over here, right, to good old Die Hard Dice, and I can get some of these babies, right? You've seen this, I play with this a lot. And you can get one of those, and you can buy your dice yourself. You can roll the dice yourself, and you can be completely in control of your replay. It gives you more of this feeling that you are the one who is replaying the season, and that you're not just letting the computer do all of the work, and then you kind of sit around and compile the box score afterwards, or just look at the box score. Or worst of all, if it's an all autoplay replay, which does happen, you just have the computer do the work for like 5 minutes, and then you look at what happened, and then go on to Reddit or someplace and talk about how cool you are, right? I've seen that happen a lot. I prefer to be able to have that, dice in your hand, or to be able to do whatever it is you need to do to manipulate things to make results come forth. But I do understand to an extent why there's a focus on closed source games, especially because when we're talking about computer games, computer product, there's always a worry that somebody's going to figure out how you did this, that somebody will steal some of your trade secrets and be able to profit from them. Now, I don't know what the first of the real closed source baseball games was. I don't know the history of these computer games that well, though I'm quite certain that many of the games that came out in the 1980s, such as Micro League Baseball and some others, were by nature closed source. The game that you see me play every other day now, Diamond Mine Baseball, is a closed source game and has some sort of very secretive algorithm that nobody fully understands. In fact, this was treated for a long time as a very important trade secret back when no other game had a pitch-by-pitch mode. And Tom Tippett, who was able to figure this out using pitch-by-pitch data, was very, very secretive and very controlling about trying to make sure that whatever his algorithm is didn't get out. There are problems, though. One of the major problems you have with the closed source games is not so much that, maybe the game's cheating, you don't know it. That's a little suspicion with some games. But the biggest problem that you have is that if there's an error, if there's a problem or an error in calculation that the game company has made and they don't realize it, you as the end user cannot really go back and fix it. I talk a lot about issues I have with 1949 and the abundance of full counts that we see, and all of the fouling pitches off over and over again after a full count, right? We know that this is behavior that was common in the mid-1990s. In the late 1940s, early 1950s, I suspect that it wasn't this common. I don't know. I can only suspect and draw conclusions based on radio games I've listened to and things I've read in old newspapers and the occasional clips that you see from old baseball highlight films, as well as the very few games that we have full video copies of, and then little snippets of other games that we have, mostly from the late 50s, right? My suspicion is that the data in Diamond Mine Baseball is geared a little bit too much towards the excessive fouling off of pitches, and that the result that this has is that the game will generally not allow the starting pitcher to stay in the ball game as long as he should, or will be a little bit more likely to take out relievers before they really should be taken out. Now, that can't be a big problem, right? Especially if you're dealing with a game like Diamond Mine Baseball, where pitcher fatigue is tied to pitch count and not to some other form of fatigue. We'll talk about pitcher fatigue a little bit more later on. I would point out, though, that tying pitcher fatigue to pitch count the way that Diamond Mine does, and I think that OOTP and Action PC Football do, though I think it's not quite to the same extreme extent, that can be very, very difficult because you're making a lot of assumptions in reaching that conclusion, especially when dealing with older seasons, and you don't have any data to back up your assumptions, right? That's a whole nother can of worms that we can talk about about, and that does impact also a lot of things that people say about sabermetrics that I think are a little bit incorrect. The nice thing about having an open source game engine is that when somebody sees that there's an error in this calculation, they can change it, or they can look and say, well, maybe there's something in the calculus that needs to be changed. They can create a patch, right? They can create some sort of community-led thing or something like this to try to make it a little bit better, a little bit more realistic. If the game engine is completely closed, then it's like your guess is as good as mine, right? There's nothing we're going to be able to do to fix things up, right? One of the reasons why the APBA community especially was so active in the 1970s and through the 1980s was because of the innovations that came out for the card and dice game. I know that there were also innovations for many of the other games, Strat-O-Matic, Replay Baseball, and I assume also for Status Pro Baseball and a lot of the other board games that I've actually never played. I believe that the ability to do this sort of change of the game engine as you play along is something that's quite powerful, and if it is handled correctly and if it is computated correctly, can actually turn a game that may be so-so or somewhat mediocre into something that's really interesting and that a lot of people would be interested in playing more with. In other words, though there is the argument that with an open game engine, anybody can steal your product and steal your engine, there is also an argument that by allowing innovation, you will get more fans because they become interested in things like the CMBA pitching system or, so-and-so's more advanced APBA boards or, something like this. Right. So, I mean, it's a little bit of, you don't want people to necessarily steal your work and steal your lunch. But at the same time, you want to give people the ability to innovate and the ability to turn things around. Personally, I think that though I know that in all computer games, the focus is on making things that are proprietary and trying to get as much money as you possibly can from the user. Personally, I do think that the community in general prefers games that have open engines and that are easy to play with and easy to manipulate by hand. The truth is that a lot of us who like playing baseball simulations are kind of old card and dice junkies. In some cases, like mine, I look at it and I'm completely overwhelmed by the idea of trying to do statistics by hand again, just like I tried to do when I was a kid. Instead, I'd much rather use the computer. And if I'm using the computer anyway, I might as well play a game that's actually created for the computer. Having said that, there is something about being able to at least roll the dice yourself and at least have some sort of say in this. Now, I do know as well that there are some games that provide kind of a hybrid, right? I know, though I haven't played it yet, that in your Strat-O-Matic computer game, you can play only with the super advanced rules on, or you can add additional rules that will throw in additional hidden dice rolls that will change the result of the game to try to make it more realistic and a little bit less prone to normal randomness in terms of dice rolls. Some people, I suppose, like that. I'm fully opposed to that personally, but, to each his own. Having said that, what I appreciate about Strat-O-Matic is that to at least an extent, it is very open in telling you that this is going on. Whereas if I play, like Action PC Baseball, I'd know nothing about how results are derived. I don't know if the result that I'm getting is the way that it is because the game company is going to, or the game itself will force me into a certain statistical outcome at the end of the season, regardless of how the game engine plays, or if, this is just the way that the game is and is treating every single individual moment the same or whatever happens. I'll give you a real practical example of this in closing. Many of you know that I have a separate YouTube channel dealing with Action PC Football. That has been on hiatus for a while, and the reason why is because Action PC Football's fatigue system is just absolutely impossible to figure out. It's a black box, and I've come to the point where I can never play with the starting players on my team because they're always fatigued for whatever reason. I can't figure out why. And the reason why I can't figure out why, of course, is because the game engine is entirely closed source. I can't look at what's happening. I can't get in behind and be like, oh, well, you have the wrong data in here for this guy or for that guy, or, oh, well, what's going on is, the way that fatigue is calculated is, you're giving these guys fatigue even if I don't target them, or I'm targeting these guys too often, or whatever the problem is. There's no way for me to figure that out because the game is completely closed source, right? And what happens in the end, if you have a closed source game and you have huge frustration with the results you're getting, is you give up, right? That's really what happens. So we have a big difference here, right? back in the 1970s, and we'll get to this a little bit later on, but in the 1970s, when people started to notice that there were problems with like APBA's 1949 season or 1941 season or whatever, in the APBA journal, people would share some tips on how to make things more realistic, how to solve the walk problem, or here's how we can solve, changes you can make to the hitters cards to make them a little bit more realistic, right? Later on, and I'm using APBA as an example because of how prolific the APBA journal was, later on in the mid-1990s when Wizards for Windows was around and you had the ability with the Bill James Encyclopedia to load in all seasons for free, which is controversial. We might forget about the controversy. But when that would happen and there would be small problems, there were recommendations from the community on how to change the weighted average pitcher grade for something towards something that's more compatible with the APBA boards, right? In other words, you get the thing set up and you don't really like the results, but instead of just like giving up and saying, I don't know what to do, because there were ways you could make manipulations and people understood how the open source game engine worked, they could then make those manipulations and take something that was a lost cause and turn it into something that you can actually deal with, right? That's where sometimes having a open source game engine is helpful. I'm not saying everything needs to be free and open source, right? I really, really promote and support free and open source software, right? I say throw away your Microsoft Office, go for LibreOffice or OpenOffice instead, right? Go to Linux, get rid of Windows, definitely get rid of Mac OS. But having said that, like, I understand that people who create these games need to make money, right? And I actually have some sympathy for them, right? I don't want people who are creating software to be expected to do it and to maintain it forever completely for free, right? I mean, it's not something that's really reasonable, right? But at the same time, I really, really appreciate it when the things that they do are open source so that if users spot a problem, we can show you where the problem is instead of maybe sending an email that gets somewhere stuck in your customer service system or having to go onto a YouTube channel or onto a blog or onto a message board and complain about it, knowing that, Dane Myers or whoever it is on the other end will never care, never look at it anyway, right? A lot of your fans, if you're a game creator, really want your game to be better. We don't want to steal stuff from you. We're trying to help, right? This is something to keep in mind because we're going to see a lot of evidence of this as we start going more and more through the history of this stuff. A lot more coming up in the future. We'll go through that when we get to it. Hope you guys are having a good day. I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.